Freedom Radio Hour. Live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Freedom Radio Hour. I'm your host, DJ Adam Cruz, and I'm sitting here next to my fantastic co-host,
Eddie Nicholas. What up, beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of 91.6 FM Freedom Radio Hour. We're here.
Yes.
We're back.
Yep.
Let's get into it. What is going on in the world of music? But you know, you do your little spiel, so let me let you do that first.
I want to make sure that our viewers and our listeners know that the Freedom Radio Hour is here not only to give you fantastic music, but we're here to be your number one source for music, business, news, and trends from around the globe. We want to take this opportunity to thank you for sharing, liking, commenting on everything we post. Follow us on social media under Freedom Radio Hour. Check out our YouTube channel and our website, freedomradiohour.com. Let's get it going.
Yes.
So there's so much tea. I don't even know where to. I should have given you like a big picture of Lipton tea to start pouring because there's just so much. I know. Oh, right. Exactly. That's my flavor too. All right. So here's the deal. Let's first talk about what's going on with copyright.
Mm-hmm.
You remember in previous episodes we covered at length the Blurred Lines case?
Yes.
Do you remember that was all about a case around that song Blurred Lines from Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams?
Being inspired by Marvin Gaye and all of that.
Right,
yes.
And you and I were like, wow, that's crazy because they didn't sample it. They didn't copy it directly. They were inspired by it and they created something that was similar. It sounded similar, but it wasn't infringing on the copyright, or so we thought.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they sided with the estate of Marvin Gaye, and Pharrell Williams and Robin Thicke's people
ended up having
lost.
to pay.
Yes. So it really opens up this new discussion because I always say, well, if that's the case, then genres like hip hop would never have come out because they would have already been curtailed by the fact that they would have been infringing on copyright. Most of those songs were sampling James Brown.
Exactly,
and
in some cases, didn't the James Brown estate sue one of those hip-hop?
Yeah, and all that stuff had to be worked out. But imagine if you couldn't even, if the genre wasn't even allowed to come to pass because you have these mechanisms that would prohibit it. Okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about. So the infringement versus inspiration argument. Why are we talking about it again? Well, we need to talk about one of the biggest, the legendary rock group, Led Zeppelin.
Led Zeppelin, yes.
Right. Were you ever a rock fan?
Always.
Okay. Do you know any Led Zeppelin music?
You better make. I should.
Got a whole lot of love.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Got a whole lot of love. Yes.
Well, they're having an issue with their classic record is entitled Stairway to Heaven.
I remember Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah.
That was a ballad.
Yes, it was beautiful. And it has a really long intro guitar, really intricate sort of syncopated guitar, and beautiful. Well, there's this group, Spirit, that registered their song entitled Taurus in 1967. The song, they claim, is very much the same thing that you hear in Stairway to Heaven. So they
and Stairway to Heaven came in what, 74?
74. Yeah, so the early 70s, whereas Taurus was out in 67. Well, rather, the registration for that copyright was filed in 1967, right? So now we're at a lawsuit here because the estate that is looking after the affairs of this band Spirit is saying, hey, Led Zeppelin, you guys copyright infringed on us. So we need to go to court because you owe us money. Y'all made millions of dollars off this legendary song. And so in court, you had this really interesting thing that was just like the Blurred Lines case because it really had to argue inspiration versus exact copying.
Exactly.
Okay, but in the case of really old records like that, you don't have the same kind of case. It wasn't run at all like the Blurred Lines case. These are songs now that predate 1978.
Okay. And in 1978, the copyright laws were different.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so what happened was that up until 1978, when you applied for a copyright off a song you made, when you sent in the application, you included the sheet music. They did not accept the recording, so you couldn't like submit a tape.
Compare.
Yeah, you couldn't submit a tape of it or recording of it. You couldn't submit a vinyl along with the application. They only took the sheet music. Okay, and so what that is called a deposit copy. So when they look at your copyright registration, they say, okay, Eddie Nicholas with this song that predates this time period. Here's the sheet music. Oh, this is the song. Okay, boom. Well, yes?
Okay. Now, I just want to ask a question because
Sure.
I remember when I did my music,
Yeah.
when you sent your, I guess, well, this is sound recordings.
Right.
And all that type of stuff. You used to have to deposit a tape or a CD with it.
Well,
when
remember,
would
you're
send
talking
it.
about after 1978.
Okay.
Right? So you have to submit the sound recording now.
Now,
but before
okay.
then, you submitted the sheet music only. They didn't accept the sound recording.
Okay.
Okay? So you're thinking, okay, we're covered. If you're Led Zeppelin and you did that, or if you're Spirit and you did that with Taurus, you are okay. All right, well, here's the issue. Back in those days, they were putting out those kinds of records fast and furious. So they relegated that responsibility to the label clerks. Oftentimes, label clerks were the one transcribing the notes into the registration application. So they weren't sitting there doing the whole song. They throw in maybe a chord or two, a few little notes,
main chords,
the main melody or
that
something.
let you identify the song.
And then it kept it moving towards the next application. Because imagine how many they were probably processing around that time. The other part is the musicians, not all musicians knew how to notate. You know, you have to know how to notate music like that. And oftentimes they didn't. So the clerks were another way of just kind of doing their best guess. Well, in court, they're looking at these songs that predate 1978. They're looking at the deposit copy only. They will only look at that sheet music to compare. So in the case of Spirit, they said, nope, Led Zeppelin did not copy because we're going by the sheet music, which doesn't have quite the patterns and elements that you're trying to say was infringed. Right?
Oh my goodness.
No.
But you know what? We're gonna come back in a second or two. 91.6 FM Freedom Radio Hour. Hey, my goodness, this is just so much. We'll be right back.
All right, see you in a bit.
From author and music industry leader Adam Cruz, check out the new book, Free the Music Business, Tips and Tales from an Indie Music Nerd. Available now on paperback, Kindle, audiobook, and soundtrack, courtesy of Mixtape Sessions.
Freedom Radio Hour. Live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM.
What up, beautiful people, and welcome back. I'm one of your co-hosts, Eddie Nicholas. We're here at 91.6 FM, the Heartbeat of Sudan, for the Freedom Radio Hour, y'all. You know, I had cut Adam off earlier because the discussion was just getting so thick and heavy, but we're going to jump right back up into it. Let's get back to all this stuff we were talking about.
Yeah, so we're basically talking about the Led Zeppelin case against, Spirit. This rock group that came out and registered their song Taurus in 1967. They're suing Led Zeppelin because they claim that Led Zeppelin stole their song Taurus when they made their hit Stairway to Heaven. Okay, so now we're in court. So the courts are trying to figure out, how do we figure this out? Did you copy? Did you not copy? They have a testimony from Jimmy Page, the lead singer of Led Zeppelin. Through that testimony, it did come out that he not only knew of the group Spirit, he also owned 4 or 5 of their previous albums. You see, Spirit had been around. They weren't newbies at that time. So it lends some of the credence to the fact that he might have listened to their albums and found something that he liked and said, oh, okay. Okay, so now we have to basically get to the nitty gritty, which is, if we were looking at this from the new way after 1978, you would have basically had Spirit win the case.
Because people would have had the opportunity to compare and contrast.
The recording of it. But because it's 1978, it's earlier than that, the courts will only look at the sheet music, which when you look at it, doesn't quite copy it. So all of this to say that the back and forth, when they get to the court, Led Zeppelin wins, Spirit loses. Then they do this appeal. The Ninth Court, the circuit court says, wait a minute, we need to reshuffle the deck here and say, let's order a new trial. Why? Because we need new jurors who are better instructed. The argument was they were poorly instructed before, because you should be able to set a new combination of the elements in order to make this argument about infringement when you listen to Taurus.
But even so they're basically sticking to the before 1978 clause.
Yeah, but even in that argument, they're saying you could rearrange the elements of that notation, and if it matches the chord structure in the same way, you had a better leg to stand on if you did it that way. Think of like an anagram. You know what an anagram is?
Yes.
It's like one word that if you rearrange the letter spells another word. So, for example, listen. if you rearrange those letters, it spells silent.
Yes.
So the courts are basically saying you didn't allow the jurors to do that, and if you had let them, it would have been a better suited case for Spirit, and that's fairer.
And but nowadays, with the technology, it's just simpler playing the song and having the computer print all the.
Well, now, but in the songs back then, now we're at this place.
You had to sit down and write that stuff out.
Right. So now, literally, just this week, they're sitting together finally to take a look at this reshuffled deck that I just told you about. New jurors have been picked, and now they're going to be allowed to look at a combination of the elements that comprise a song Taurus. And the lawyers for Spirit are saying, okay, the other thing is, can you listen to the recording? If you listen just to the recording, let them listen and they be it, then you'll see we have a leg to stand on. To which so far the judges are like, you're trying to make us change the rules for before 1978? This is the rule. So we got to see what happens but I'm saying, I think what's going to happen is the folks make a lot of money by using little pieces of free stock music, stuff that doesn't need to be clear, that's not going to have a suit against you and all this stuff. What will happen if you allow just the sheet music to be the precedence, the status quo to continue, you're going to leave all that stuff that wasn't registered out.
And
so
that's free for people to grab.
Yeah, that people can grab all that stuff, you know. So I think that's a really interesting thing, because imagine if you have Beatles catalog, imagine Santana's famous guitar solo. Maybe that whole little intricate solo wasn't registered in terms of the copyright back then. So now you could have Apple Music sell their smartphone using that guitar solo, and they don't have to pay anybody. So, and this is like, I think this is also a great talk about innovation, because we tend to look at things through very sort of a few little layers.
Yes.
And it's so much more complicated, it's more nuanced than that. And I think you and I as house music artists in this day and age should do better things. Like, I definitely have songs that I've not registered with the Copyright Office yet. At the bare minimums, I want you all to take a moment and look at any songs you've created and register them with the Copyright Office. Because while it's not, we've talked about how it's not necessary, it's not required, it does afford you added protection.
Yes.
And
especially if somebody chooses to use something that you've created.
Yeah, and then they look for the registration, they don't even have your application or your sound recording to even A/B it. You know, and so you can imagine what will happen with these older legends. Their older songs. Imagine the Eagles, the Beatles, and all that stuff will be up for grabs. That's why you and I today, if we're artists and we're putting out music, we have to register our work. Let's take a break. When we come back, let's talk more of this music business news right here on the Freedom Radio Hour.
91.6 FM, the Heartbeat of Sudan.
From author and music industry leader Adam Cruz, check out the new book, Free the Music Business, Tips and Tales from an Indie Music Nerd. Available now on paperback, Kindle, audiobook, and soundtrack, courtesy of Mixtape Sessions.
Freedom Radio Hour.
And we're back live on Capital Radio, 91.6 FM, the Heartbeat of Sudan, and on the web at dwildmusicradio.com. I'm sitting next to my fantastic partner,
Eddie Nicholas. What up, beautiful people? And we're back. You know, we've talked about so many things.
Yes.
You know, earlier in our past segments and all that type of stuff.
I'm just feeling inspired.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of inspiration, when we talk about inspiration and things that we just previously talked about, especially with music,
I feel like it's
the inspiration, you know, is there like a health aspect or anything that's stuck up in there somewhere?
Well, I'll tell you this. I feel like one of the things that we talked about with this copyright case in last segments, we were talking about the Led Zeppelin case and how music is looked at as either infringed copyright or inspiration, right? So I'm saying, well, maybe it's time for us to be inspired to innovate and think about music differently like they seem to. And the courts, you know, there seems to be a push-pull happening, and I think it's time for us to think about music differently too.
But when you speak of differently, what do you mean by differently?
Well,
you know,
I'll tell you this. I put out a book last year called Free the Music.
Yes.
Tips and Tales from an Indie Music Nerd. And part of the book, I talked about solutions to making us more money. If you're an artist, a DJ, producer releasing music, and you are earning royalties, we have always been talking about how come we don't get more money. Well, there's these things that happen called streaming, and they have to figure out how much to pay us artists every time you listen to one of our songs, and that's how they landed on fraction of a penny per stream. So I'm saying, all right, we've talked about that. Now what can we do to make some more money? Because that's not, that's a fight we need to keep having. Let's get more of the dollar. I'm not saying stop fighting that. I'm saying in addition to that, we need to take on some bigger ticket items. One thing I want to talk about is music as therapy, as a health and wellness thing. All right. So one thing I want to talk about is what this Harvard study says. And this
now, are we talking about something different as far as when we talk about music therapy? Because when I hear the term music therapy, I'm seeing it being used to help people that, like autistic children.
Exactly. So check it out.
Elderly folks.
Yes, all of that. So check it out. So this Harvard study discovered a few things. One, a lot of you probably be like, of course, we all know these things, but it's helpful to get the research behind it, especially from such an institution as Harvard. All right. So a Harvard study discovered that musicians' brains have more bundles of nerves collecting the left and right hemispheres. That's URI, right? But when you're listening to music, this is what happens. You engage particular aspects of your brain that help you in your life, like the brainstem, the cerebellum, there are auditory cortexes, and all these kinds of things. That spearheads a lot of talk about what happens when you use music as therapy. One thing to make sure you said, just like you said, it helps with things like dementia, Alzheimer's. It helps to deal with the mood stabilization because they found long studies that have indicated that music is a natural antidepressant. And then when you start to research big pharma, you know, those companies like Johnson & Johnson, you know, they made like $276 million last year. And all of them put together, I'm talking about the Pfizers and Mercks of the world, they spent $4.5 billion last year in advertising.
And in their advertising, they use music.
Yes, and exactly. And in the advertising, who are they advertising to? Not just URI using TV and radio and newsprint, for example. They're also advertising to doctors. They want doctors to start pushing whatever product they're putting out back to their patient. So they'll go mess around. I mean, there have been investigations where they found some pharmaceutical companies they've had to fine because they're paying and basically bribing some of these doctors to co-sign these products.
And push their products.
So I'm saying, imagine we were big pharma and I'm talking the music game, us artists, not the label, the artists directly, had the kind of money that they were spending $4.5 billion to advertise to those same individuals, right? I'm talking about to doctors, to television and radio and print in the medicine and medical circuit, so on and so forth, that generates that $276 million that Johnson & Johnson makes. How are we going to do that without any money? Well, in one of our previous episodes, I talked about how politicians right now are coming around trying to get your vote because it's election time. And one in particular is talking about this freedom dividend, because we know that companies like Amazon and Apple and others pay very little in taxes or nothing in taxes at all. But they build this empire off the back of the general citizenry.
They make billions.
Yes. So I'm saying, I wonder if we innovate, get inspired to think that we can get a share of the product sold. I'm talking about, say, Amazon Echo Dot speakers, Apple's smartphone. If we could earn a basic income, a universal basic income from that, and it wouldn't be put in our pockets as artists, and we put in a pool to advertise just in the same way, the therapeutic and the medicinal qualities of music. Not advertising like buy this song or that song. I'm talking about advertising its therapeutic effects, because they seem to be keen to want to keep you hooked on antidepressants as a chemical. But what if you could get them hooked on antidepressant, the organic version, which is music? And
speaking of that, you know, this makes me think about those, because as an educator, we always played music to put our children to sleep.
Yes.
Whether it was jazz or whale sounds or any of that type of stuff. So, in other words, my question would be, don't we already have mechanisms in place that already services those type of needs when we talk about the health and wellness and what music does therapeutically? Aren't there already certain things in place for that?
Yes, but what you're not seeing is doctors prescribing music in a general sense, like they would push a product. You see, imagine if doctors push Xanax.
Oh, you need to go listen to X amount of Mozart or somebody like that.
Because there are studies that support that argument, listening to Mozart and what it does to your brain to help you with what ails you.
Now, see, I just threw that name out there.
And no, there are studies to support that, so it doesn't come out of thin air. There's properties. Soothing music or versus heavier sounding music can have a certain effect on your brain and your and your psychosis, whatever you're going through, depending on what you're prescribed. Now that is different because now a lot of those dollars now come directly to our pocket because we all pull together to advertise at this bigger level.
Okay, and with that being said, those people who have signed into that would be the ones.
Well, you would just, by virtue of being an artist, you would already be eligible to have that income because.
But you would still I think you would still have to sign in or someplace to let them know that you're
signing
artist.
in by virtue of having your music out there. You sign into various organizations. I'm just saying, we got to do something that's different, y'all. And maybe it's time that we try to make some real money from the way Big Pharma does it. Take a cue from them, because what we're doing now is, I feel like we're crabs in a barrel fighting over this fraction of a penny per stream. And we're all pointing the finger at each other saying, it's you, it's you, it's you. But there's really a bigger thing at play that we ignore because we're uninformed.
And again, it's all about that marketing, that advertising, and just getting out there and pushing a brand.
Yes.
And what comes underneath that brand and what comes along with that brand. So yeah, we all got a lot of work to do because there are new territories and new frontiers that we most certainly can go look into and at best conquer. So yes, I think, hey, anything we talk about is always something new and interesting to me. So it should be new and interesting to you too. Anything else, Adam?
That's it. That's all the time we have for today. But before we go, I want to make sure that you guys know to check out EddieNicholas.com because he doesn't even know this. But by the time you watch this episode, his brand new single will be out, Revolution.
Oh, wow. See, another surprise to me.
So check
Revolution.
It out. So check out Revolution right now by visiting EddieNicholas.com. The brand new single is out today. Also check out DJAdamCruz.com. I have all of the new episodes for the shows that you watch are there, along with other mixes. My new album, my new singles are there as well. Pick up a copy of my book, Free the Music Business. That's available on Amazon and Audible. And of course, leave a comment, share, like, comment under everything. We'd love to hear from you.
And hit us up.
Yeah, definitely. Have a great weekend and a great week ahead. See you next time, y'all.
91.6 FM, the Heartbeat of Sudan, DWildMusicRadio.com. It's all of us.
That's it.
Peace, love, and whole lot of soul.